Hello, I'm Scott Masson, Professor of English Literature, here to discuss with you episode 2 of The Lord of the Rings, Rings of Power, Amazon's adaptation of the famous series by J.R.R. Tolkien. I began just yesterday releasing my conjectures on episode 1, which I hope you found helpful. If you did, please subscribe to my channel, like it if you would. Today I want to pick up where I left off. I mentioned last time that I was going to focus rather exclusively on the elves, and in particular the figure of Galadriel and the way she was portrayed, which I thought signified many things about the series. And if you want to, of course, you can go back to that. And I'm going to build on that here. But I wanted to pick up some of the threads that I had not tended to last time, and in particular some of the subplots that were introduced and the characters that were going to be intertwined with Galadriel's as we went forward. And one of the groups of characters, at any rate, were the Harfoots. Now, the Harfoots are one of the three species of hobbits that are brought into Tolkien's legendarium. Mentioned briefly in Concerning Hobbits. They are a darker skinned hobbit, and we will see that in some of the hobbits at any rate. They all speak a variety of, sounds to me like something like Irish. And they are a sort of wandering ancestral community of halflings, led by a leader who is a trail finder. And he guides this community to safety. They're very much insular, but they're migratory. But they're very much like the hobbits that we've become accustomed to in The Lord of the Rings, insofar as they largely keep to themselves. I'll come back to Sadok Burrows, who is the leader, in a minute. But I want to pick up here where the series left off, at least in episode 1, which was a comet streaking across the sky, seen throughout all of Middle-earth, which is how this series is going to begin, with the discovery of the site in which the comet landed. But it actually begins very ever so briefly with Galadriel swimming backward east towards Middle-earth. Remember, she jumped off her ship and did not go to Valinor as she was intended to do, bent on facing the evil which he was convinced was still present in Middle-earth. And of course, we, the viewers, know that she is correct, and we know that she's correct because, of course, we see the signs of evil already presented all over the place. We see that one of the leaves of Linden's trees, where Gil-galad resided, had turned black with goo on the reverse side of it as he picked it up. We see that there is again this black goo that comes out of the udder of a cow, and we have a sword hilt found by a young boy, a Southlander by the name of Theo, which it seems to me to be a sword hilt at any rate, with Sauron's sigil on it, and that sigil lights up in flames, and looks very much like the sigil that Galadriel had found up in the north, up in the northern, or something like the Arctic, which convinced her that Sauron was still there and was simply cloaking himself until the time came for him to reveal himself. And the signs seem to be there for us. Now, the wise, the elves, Gil-galad, Elrond, and so forth, cannot see it. Others deny it. And there are the common people seem to see it. So this is in keeping with what we often see in fairy tales, folk tales, that the wise, the scientists, those who are tasked with wisdom and seen as leaders are often blind to the reality that is set all around them. So all well and good. As far as that leader, Sadok Burrows, let me say something about this and about the portrait of these hobbits that we call Harfoots. Sadok Burrows appears, at least as he's described in the first episode, as an astronomer. He watches the heavens lights, and he also consults his books. But one thing I wanted to note about that is there is no script. This seems to be a pre-literate race. When he's reading, he's looking at pictures, sort of a pictorial language. So it's very rudimentary. It doesn't mean that there's no wisdom there, but it's certainly not the wisdom of lore that is going to recapture tales. And I go back again to what I said in the first episode, that it seems to me in many ways that this is one of the great affronts of this new series, is that it does not bind itself to myth and legend of yore and understand itself in accordance with that. It's forgotten the past. It doesn't call upon memory per se, and wisdom in that sense, but rather in very vague senses. And so, nonetheless, for all that, we have this sort of mythological and to some degree very rudimentary society of wanderers being led by Sadok Burrows, and he sees portents in the night's sky, in the heavens lights, and also notes that in his words that the shadows are watching. And indeed they are. And when we see the comet come across, this obviously betokens something, but what it is, we're not sure. So we see that there is wisdom there, and that is being seen again by the race of hobbits, in keeping with the Lord of the Rings, that there's something that is to be found in the humble folk that the great do not have. And so let me pick that up then. So two of these figures of halflings, the Harfoots, are female characters. Eleanor or Nori Brandyfoot and Poppy Proudfellow. And Nori in particular is a rather impish sort, very much probably like Pippin and Merry. And obviously the names are very closely related to this. These are fictional characters, of course, created by the Amazon creative team. They're not to be found there as part of Tolkien's lore. And it is they who are the ones that come upon this meteor crash. And when they come to that, they see that, as you would expect, a great crater there, but also signs of fire. But the fire is not burning, and they come across a man, very large man. Obviously not a man per se, and there's speculation I see online about who this individual is. Now, I happen to think I know who it is. But some of the speculation out there is that this stranger must be one of the Maya, one of the 5 Maya sent to Middle-earth to stop Sauron. I think that's good speculation. But it could also be Sauron himself, and some seem to think that that will be the case. And why would that be? Well, the signs of evil we've already seen thus far. The fallen leaves of the linden trees and the wolves, and as we saw even last time, the presence of orcs, all of which betoken the spread of evil. And we pick it up, though, with these characters coming across them, and let me just give it away. This figure finally, incapable of speaking himself, reveals his identity by drawing this insignia in the ground. And for those of you who are unaware of this, I'm quite certain, though we will find out soon enough, that what he writes is Gandalf's rune. So this is none other than Gandalf himself, being sent obviously as a emissary of the gods in order to check Sauron and prevent the spread of evil. So he's probably an Istari, and yes, sent there to stop him. Now remember, if you remember your Lord of the Rings, there are 5 of those. Actually, we only get 3 of them mentioned in the Lord of the Rings, but they're Saruman and Gandalf, Radagast, Alatar, and Palando. So it could be one of those, but as I say, what he draws on the ground suggests to me that he is in fact Gandalf, because he also communicates with the fireflies, speaks to them in the same way that we saw Gandalf speak to the moths in the Lord of the Rings. Obviously, if it were Gandalf, if it were Saruman or another one of the Istari, well, then that would add complexity to the portrait as well. But I'm pretty sure that it is Gandalf, but we shall see soon enough. Back to the story. Galadriel is swimming backwards towards Middle-earth, and she comes across a boat, a ship. But it's not just any old ship. It's a ship that's been attacked. It's been terrorized by what is described as a worm, something along the lines of a dragon. But this is a sea dragon, a monster in the deep. And the people on Earth, we can see the enmity between men and elves. We see it repeatedly, actually, here, which is another sign of growing evil, by the way. When Galadriel is pulled on board the ship. But when she's pulled on board the ship, she encounters somebody who will end up being significant. Now, this, again, is not a figure that is known to me before, and it's, again, an invention of the Amazon creative team. His name is Halbrand. He's one of the low men of the Southlands. He's a sort of a rogue, not a one of the kings or the princes. This is very much going to be the typical Hollywood tale of the common folk against the highborn. Again, very much against Tolkien's own inclinations, that in royalty and in aristocracy and in those of rulers, there's something good and great in it. Thus far, Tolkien has decided, the Amazon creators have very much steered against that, other than in the person of Galadriel. And as I said last time, Galadriel is being very much presented as being anti-establishment through and through, and the establishment, for its sake, being seen as highly corrupt, politicized, and incapable of leading with moral rectitude. So Halbrand is the figure that we meet here, and he is the sole survivor when the ship is torn apart by this worm, and he actually saves Galadriel when she is drawn down to the deep by a rope around her leg, and he drags her back on the ship. But they are not a significant part of the tale in the second episode. What is significant is the growth and extent of evil, and the ominous sense of the growth of evil. And we see this in a couple of ways. One, in the form of the discovery of the destruction of a little village. Causes unknown, but a tunnel had been found underneath the village, in which one of the elves that are invented here, by the name of, Arondir, a sylvan elf, goes down in search of what comes at the end of this, and what comes at the end of it is actually an orc, an orc which is also found beneath the floorboards of his beloved, whose name is Bronwyn, a human. So there's a tension there in the series already, potential love interest, Bronwyn and Arondir, but it is unrequited love, because the hatred of the Southlanders for the elves is so strong that this is not a possibility here even. But they are definitely. There's definitely romance in the air. But Bronwyn, who is this single mother healer, ends up being another heroic figure. She slays an orc herself. And again, she speaks against the men in her village who want to remain. She's telling them they must flee. They will end up heeding her call. And so once again, we see a similar sort of figure, female figure, leading the benighted male folk who are not wanting to move on from there. So we're seeing a consistency of portraiture here, which is rather troubling. At least troubling if you want to see any sort of consistency with Tolkien's corpus of writings. Her son, for that matter, whose name is Theo, comes across something which is highly ominous. And as I say, he's the one who finds this sword hilt, which bears the insignia, of none other than Sauron. And at the end of this second episode, not only do we see the insignia or the sigil light up with the fire of Sauron, but also a gray sort of a smoke rise from the end of it, which signifies the growth of evil, as we've seen already from the shadowy sense in which evil is portrayed in The Lord of the Rings. So all of this is highly ominous. The final group of characters that need some sort of mention, let me say something about this, are the dwarves. The dwarves primarily being in two forms, one of Prince Durin the Fourth, the dwarves speaking with Scottish accents, Glaswegian more particularly, and who happens to be an old friend of Elrond's. And that forms a great deal of comedy. I think the acting is quite well done, very understated and yet warm. And also, however, his father, Durin the Third, who's the king at the time. So the prince is in a sense a minor character, but he will become a highly significant character. Durin the Third is a significant figure, though, in The Lord of the Rings. And more importantly, when his chest opens up at the end of the second episode, we're wondering what that might be. The light goes up, and there might be some thought on the watcher's behalf that this is one of the Silmarilli here. But of course, that is not what it is. If you know anything about Durin, it is more likely to be one of the elven rings, because at the beginning of the Lord of the Rings movie, we see one of the seven kings, the one in the middle, that is none other than Durin the Third himself. So he has the chief of the three rings. So very interesting. And at this point, just hinting at what we know will develop as the prelude to the War of the Rings, but now we see the different races being drawn together into alliances, tensions residing between them, between the elves and the dwarves, between the men and the elves, and outside of that all, and seemingly unknown by the others, the Harfoots, who have the ancient wisdom to know that this is somehow in the stars, and yet somehow the elves are ignorant of this, which is, to my mind, one of the most extraordinary aspects of the portraiture, and one of the least convincing if you are following Tolkien at all. But I think that should be sufficient for me for this week. I will come to episode 3 in about a week's time, and hopefully you're enjoying it, and I shall speak to you soon. Again, remember to like and share this if you would. Thank you. Bye for now.